Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast.
I would like to push it as hard as I can. Through adventure racing, I've found that I really enjoy pushing my limits. I found that in other walks of life as well, in other stages of my life. But through adventure racing, every time I find my limit, I push past it. And now I'm finding that limit is trying to push as hard as possible in the race.
Well, for me, the action is the juice. I'm in.
Okay, you people sit tight, hold the fort, and keep the home fires burning. And if we're not back by dawn, call the president.
The sun is setting as the sky turns pink. The mountains are calling, and all I can think of is you, my friend, my partner in crime. What you doing today? What you doing tonight? I will run with you till the river runs dry.
And now a word about enabled tracking. Whether you're conquering grueling trails or paddling across vast waters, enabled tracking is your ultimate GPS tracking companion. Enabled tracking has proudly partnered with iconic events such as the Tug Hill Extreme, Relay Iowa, and Teton Ogre Adventure Race, ensuring timing, real-time participant tracking, and enhanced safety measures. But it doesn't stop there. They are the trusted choice for events like Paddle for a Cause, Raid the Rockies, and the Longest Day Adventure Race, as well as countless other events across the country. Imagine the excitement as spectators follow their favorite athletes' every move. We know those dot watchers love it. Or the peace of mind knowing that your loved ones are safe and accounted for. With enabled tracking, it's all possible. Don't miss out on this revolutionary technology that's transforming the world of endurance sports. Visit adventureenablers.com. That's right, one word, adventureenablers.com, to learn more and request a quote for your next epic adventure. Enabled tracking, where adventure meets accuracy. As listeners of the Dark Zone know, we are strong supporters of Ascend Athletics and their ongoing mission of offering women and girls mountaineering-based leadership training and community service in Afghanistan and Pakistan. This spring, we hiked with them as part of their annual Hike for Her event, and it was wonderful to see the hard work of Ascend in action. This summer, they're scaling up to help even more women and girls, including an Ascend ambassador-led hike to K2 Base Camp. Want to learn more about how you could help Ascend redefine opportunity for women and girls around the world? Visit ascendathletics.org. That's right, ascendathletics, one word, .org. And remember, Ascend pays nothing for this spot on the Dark Zone. We love the work that they do and are happy to share news of their good work here. Welcome to episode 97 of the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. Today we are joined by Canadian adventure racer Ben Kwiatkowski. Fresh off strong finishes on 3 continents and a past participant in Eco-Challenge, Ben is here to share his tales of teamwork, triumph, training, and the challenges that tested his and his team's limits. Before we get to the episode, a quick shout out to La Ruta Madre, an up-and-coming adventure race in Mexico that deserves your attention. Javier Barreda is the race director, and he loves the race, and he should get more attention for it. Check it out at larutamadre.mx. That's right, larutamadre.mx, and a link will be in the show notes. Now, sit back and relax, get ready to be inspired by Ben and his incredible stories. This is the Dark Zone, folks. You keep racing and we'll keep talking. Enjoy. Welcome to the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. Today we are joined by one of the more prolific racers for the past year, Ben Kwiatkowski. Has done a whole bunch of races all around the world. He's on my radar as a guest. He's with Expedition Canada. So much is going to be going on in Canada. The team is having a great season. We have another episode coming out later on this year with the race directors for Expedition Canada. It's going to be fantastic. We can't wait to do that. But Ben is here to talk adventure racing. Ben is here to talk about the races they've done. They've been all over the world. They've been in 3 continents this year in their big races that they've done. So Expedition Canada is out there killing it. Ben, before we jump into your racing, tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get involved in the sport?
Sure. Sounds good. Hey, Brian, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I listen regularly to the podcast and I really look forward to chatting about adventure racing and being on the podcast here. I got into adventure racing about 5 years ago with Fiji. Eco-Challenge. I had been doing, a lot of endurance racing throughout my life and had done some shorter adventure races. And this one was on my radar, just popped up, and there was an application. We threw in our names, myself and some other firefighters. I was a wildland firefighter here in BC for a few years. And the four of us put an application together, and just by chance we got accepted, and we jumped in all the way in, having no idea what we were getting into, straight into Fiji.
So let me just let's roll that back a little bit. So 5 years ago, many of the folks listen to the show. They know Fiji, they know Eco-Challenge, all of that. So you were one of those teams that just signed up, and Mark Burnett picked you out of a hat and welcome to Fiji, and off we go. And have you done an adventure race before?
I had done a small one, just a handful of hours, the Momar races, which had been around for a long time in British Columbia. I'd done a short one, but this was the first expedition race. I didn't even know what an expedition adventure race was. And sure enough, Fiji swallowed us and spit us out, mostly alive still.
Well, so who are your teammates? Who'd you go with over there?
So that was with Thomas Hardy, Jasper Edge, and Alora Van Jarrett.
And did you have to bring a support person with you, or was that optional?
Yep, we brought a support person with us. A friend of ours, a fifth, came along as well to be a support person, which was great to have that as our first experience. We had somebody to lean on and somebody to help us out, who was able to talk to all the other support folks as well, and really get some knowledge for us and help us through that course. And
so clearly your introduction to adventure racing is on the biggest stage that we've seen in recent years. A lot of folks come to the Dark Zone through Eco-Challenge Fiji. They've seen the race. They've watched it on Amazon. We all loved it. And then, so you said it chewed up and spit you out a little bit. How did your race go? Walk us through it.
We were limping through the whole thing. We came in strong off the start and we're feeling great, but we got sick pretty quick into the race. And I got a gastro illness along with Tom, and we were knocked out really, really bad. I think of the 3 of the last 4 nights, we got over 8 hours of sleep, just trying to rest and recover so that we could go on to the next section. And that sickness actually lingered for many months later. And I ended up getting a number of tests, and turns out that I had a celiac response to a nasty gut infection, and I'm now diagnosed celiac from that race. So,
holy cow!
I've got something living with me from my first race ever that will be with me for life, I guess.
Clearly, that challenge and what you went through there, what you were diagnosed with, has not slowed you down. So, the race that you had in Fiji, going into it, obviously you really weren't sure what you're going to get yourself into. You got yourself into a lot. I'm more curious about that. What did you take away from your Fiji experience that you then applied to the rest of your adventure racing? Because you're still doing it, so clearly you enjoyed it.
I think one of the things that we took away from that is that everything is relative. That whatever you're doing now, no matter how hard it seems, that's all relative. That you're on day 4, 5, 6 of an adventure race. How does that compare to the past? Have you been struggling more in the past, or less, or similar, or where are you at in comparison to that? And Fiji, over I think it took us maybe 10 days, and we were, came out of that, lost 20 pounds and celiac and etc. That it when we go into a race now, that on day 3, 4 we look back on that, or look back on a long trek from another race, or a long bike section from another race, or a long paddle from another race, and even if what we're doing now is feeling harder and pushing past that limit, we know where that limit is. We know where we've pushed past it before. And we know that all that we need to do is keep going to push past that limit. These limits that we set for ourselves, these arbitrary limits, they don't really exist, because if we find that limit, we just push past it and carry forward. And that's what Fiji taught us. Was I thought that I reached my limit so many times in that race, and we just kept going. We just kept trying, just kept pushing, and kept pushing past that and carrying on.
And I think you're right about that. And I think one of the healthy byproducts of adventure racing is the fact that you begin to get a sense of capacity and what you could be. And you get it from an internal perspective. Like, you see it in yourself, but when you look to your right and to your left, you look around the TAs and you see what everybody else is doing, you say to yourself, well, if they can do it, I can certainly do it too. Mm-hmm. What was your take on, as you were managing the Fiji experience and you were getting ready for the race and you were looking around, How did you find yourself as compared to the other adventure racers? And I'll give a caveat here. You're a wildland firefighter, right? It's an elite unit. It's hard to train for. It's hard to get into. So you didn't lack for physical ability. You didn't lack for bravery. You didn't lack for courage. You didn't lack for putting yourself into risky situations. So when you got to that start line and you looked around and you measured yourself up against everybody else, what were the thoughts that you were having?
Something that I noticed in that race is those groups that were pulled together for that race, many of them were the top racing teams in the world, and they had much experience, spent lots of time with each other. And the other teams that were brought together that didn't have any experience, such as ours, had a story, had some sort of connector that brought that team together. I didn't really see any teams that were just a random assortment of individuals. There was some sort of connectivity. And that's what I saw there, that at any stage of the race, looking around, there was that team aspect and that bonding aspect. And we all know that that's a huge part of adventure racing in so many different ways, of having a strong team and being able to rely on each other, and the personal bonds that you build there, and being able to push yourself to your max right next to somebody else who's also doing that, and the sort of camaraderie that builds out of that. And we can compare that to many other walks of life too, such as wildland firefighting, where we are pushed to our limits right next to somebody and builds bonds that last forever. A lot of my best friends are wildland firefighters from the few years that I was there. So being in those TAs or just out on course and seeing these other teams, seeing them interact, having those conversations, and that sort of camaraderie that builds within the team. So, in intra-team and then inter-team relationships as well. And then seeing that continue through my career in adventure racing, advancing here, seeing that more and more of the interconnectedness between all the teams. After Croatia, we spent a couple of days hanging out with Bend Racing, who we were competing against not long before, and now we're drinking beers with next to the Adriatic Sea and chatting about racing and life and everything in between.
Yeah, you're right. There is that bond that does exist. And, it's interesting. Like, I always think about adventure racing when it comes to the length of the races. And what I find is my favorite part of this experience, and I think this is part of the growth of the Dark Zone, came from this. I love the racing, the teamwork. Let's put those off the side just for 1 second. But my favorite part of the race is when the race ends and everybody is standing around and we have our maps on our hands and we have the shared experience. And everybody has that wonderful chitter chatter that occurs about, oh, we went this way, you went that way. Oh, this was hard, that was hard. And I find that those shared experiences are really the connective tissue that drives so much of what we do and so much of what we see as a community. And you reference that, like you go to Croatia, right? And you race your hearts out and you go as hard as you can. I definitely want to talk about that race, because Igor puts on, clearly that's one of the most beautiful races. I mean, the way they capture those images in Croatia is just really something else. That's become really a premier destination race for a lot of people. But I agree with you that that shared experience, whether with a teammate or an opponent, that when the race is over, there's a bond that exists between everybody who does it together. And I think that it's that bond, whether it be 3-hour race, 6-hour race, 12-hour race, 5-day, 10-day race, that's universal, agnostic of the distance of the race.
Yeah, I agree that at the end of the race, when you're at that finish line or at the award ceremony after, or in those sort of post couple of days when you're still there, especially in these destination places, is having those connections with those other teams and reliving that whole experience, that we all lived it on our own, and then coming together and then sharing all of those experiences together. And having those conversations and building that translates even further, that there's sort of the acute phase of the race where we're all dealing with it in this high intensity environment. We then relax from it a little bit, relive some of these moments, re-explore some of them, and then that builds sort of this foundation that when you see these folks and these teams and these other people at these races the next time, that still exists, and you're more than happy to see these people that you haven't spent that much time with. Maybe you've raced with them a couple of times before, or maybe just chatting on the finish line, but that sort of innate bond, it transcends beyond just the single race to multiple races ahead.
You mentioned Croatia, and also you race out in Chile and you race in South Africa. Before we get into those races themselves, let's talk about you as an athlete. I always like to say the idea we have to earn the finish line, right? It's one thing to want to be a racer, agnostic to difference. It's one thing else to be a racer. And we all kind of live along a continuum of fitness and strength and capacity. Walk us through, for the listener who may be, in adventure racing themselves, toying with it, What is your preparation look like? What does your training regime look like? Do you work alone with other people? Do you follow a coach? Like, how are you able to do all of this racing successfully?
In terms of the training and how I prepare myself for the adventure racing, I include a lot of diversity and a lot of things that I would do normally anyways. I love to run. I love to bike. I love to ski. I love to climb. I love all of these things, and I love to do them every day. So I just get out there and do them, and I try to do them as much as possible. Every once in a while, I try and just make that a little bit longer, a little bit further, a little bit harder, and make myself uncomfortable with it, just to get used to that mindset of being uncomfortable. But in terms of the physicality and the training aspect, when you're pushing towards being an elite athlete, then yes, you need a training plan. And that's what I do have now, is a strengthening plan, and starting to get into the gym and using weights and sort of trying to cater some of my workouts a little bit more when it's on trail as well. But coming into Fiji in the first couple of races there, it was just doing what I like to do all the time and pushing it a little bit further and harder. I find with adventure racing, because it's so long and you spend so much time there, you can train yourself to that in terms of ultra distance, and let's call it uber distance that we get into with some of these expedition races. And I find with the training is just trying to push that as much as you can, as often as you can. And if that's once every couple of months, you can do a really long run, or once a week, whatever you can do will help you towards that and set you up for success there.
Yeah, that's the most common. We have Jesse Spangler was a guest on a previous episode, and he's had a lot of success. And one thing he talks about is, and he's a strong athlete, great navigator. He says with his busy life that he has, he sets the goal of trying to move every single day. He tries to build something in every single day as often as possible with a map in his hand, right? He builds that in, but he realizes that consistency over time is what matters. And I agree with you. I think for the folks who are toying with the idea of adventure racing and want to get better at it, is just basically just getting involved in regular movement is the way to go, right? And building. And to your point, you talk about that you have that. Now, as an addition to that, I think if you really want to sharpen the spear, if you really want to get strong, it helps to have another voice feeding your training. And there's no doubt about that at all. I know a lot of racers use coaches. They like it for two reasons. One thing is that they get to farm out the thinking that's involved. Having somebody else do it makes it easier for them. But then also a coach can see something that you can't see. And so those two things work together. But I do agree with you that regular movement and inviting discomfort, I like the way that you said that you invite discomfort for the regular work. What else do you do? Like you mentioned all those movement-based disciplines. Do you do anything that you really focus on to grow as an athlete?
What I've started to shift towards is strength training. And I think that's a really big part of this, because we're so focused on the endurance that we can get out there and push our cardio and get that long, slow distance, the low heart rates, the lower zone heart rate training. And that's really easy to get into, I find, as an endurance athlete. That's our comfort zone. That's where we like to be. That's where we want to be. And I'm happy to throw on my running shoes and go run for 3 hours in zone 2. But to get that high intensity or the strength workouts and push myself into the uncomfortable area really helps, not only in terms of the physicality of helping train that and train that high intensity, but also the mental side of things as well, of getting yourself to that uncomfortable place. Because in adventure racing, you will be uncomfortable. And whether that's your first race, second race, where you're just uncomfortable in the situation and something new and pushing harder than you have before, or you're into your 10th, 12th plus race where you're trying to chase the podium and now you're pushing even harder and getting yourself into that uncomfortable zone as well. So I find with the training is trying to make myself uncomfortable, whether that's physically or mentally. Get up early and run in the rain, or take a map and get yourself intentionally lost and then figure out where you are, figure out what we're doing. Go out there without enough food and water and get yourself used to that. So trying to make yourself intentionally uncomfortable, which it's really hard to do. And with that idea of a coach or a trainer, in addition to some of the things you mentioned, is also the accountability there. Whether or not you're sending in your stats regularly to have somebody give a bit of accountability, just for me to have in the background that I have, a physiotherapist who's given me a training program, just knowing that he's given me that training program is enough accountability for myself. Or your team of having, a Strava group where you can monitor each other, or sharing just some little tidbits of, hey, I I did a race this past weekend and shared that with the teammates. And in addition to getting some kudos, was just some accountability as well there.
The whole team dynamic is amazing, right? Because there's the during the race teamwork that has to exist, but there's also the idea that you're going into a race, you're going to be one of 4 racers, and I always joke, and it's on my Facebook page. There's no greater motivation for training than the fear that you'll be the slowest person on a 4-person team. Like that is the greatest motivation. I train 10,000 times harder because I can't look at my 3 teammates and be the slow person. And so I kill myself for that. So there is that mutual accountability that does exist to each other.
Absolutely. The accountability for each other and going into that, knowing that you want to be able to perform for yourself and for your team, but also knowing that this amazing team that you have are going to be the ones to carry your pack when you're the slowest and not bat an eye. They'll support you in every way possible because you're racing as a team. There are no individuals in adventure racing. You are always racing as a team, sharing the weight, sharing the load, sharing food, sharing everything. So accountability to race hard and to help each other.
But I bet I would argue that a teammate's lack of annoyance, I'll use that word, and having to carry your pack is completely offset by the idea that they know you did the training. Right? They know you put the work in. They know you're having a hard time during the race. Everybody's a hard time. So here's the pack. As opposed to if you're not doing the training and if you disintegrate hour 12 of a 24-hour race, they're going to be like, come on, Ben. Like you were on the couch eating donuts. We're out killing ourselves. And so there is that dynamic where you're mutually accountable to each other, but then you call each other out when the time comes. If you pick your teammates right, that's never really an issue, though, because everybody does the training.
Exactly. And there's a time for that accountability and that calling out ahead of time that, a month in advance, 2 months, 3 months in advance, that's where we egg each other on and push each other and encourage that training. And when it comes to the race, it is what it is. And you're there and we're all in the thick of it together. Exactly. And you roll it out. There was another episode of the Dark Zone we just had on. We had these 2 professors from Johns Hopkins. They did this really great research paper. And they said how in the best teams, every problem is a team problem. There are no individual problems. If a bike breaks, it's a team problem. Someone's sick, it's a team problem. No one's ever completely on their own for that. And I think that was when they said that, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense because you kind of live inside that world. So I love it. I love your Eco-Challenge Fiji. Welcome to adventure racing. Even though you got sick, you stayed with it. I look at your last 3 races, 3 really, really big races here. So let's talk about it a little bit because one of them was covered extensively on the Dark Zone. The other 2, you gave a chance to give us a peek on that. Walk us through Worlds in South Africa. Who'd you race with? How'd that race go for you? Sure. Worlds in South Africa was with MP Allery, Dave Ellis, and Laval St. Germain. And we came together last minute. I think it was about a month before the race. The 3 of them were planning on racing together, but I came in as a 4th quite last minute. I had never raced with any of them. I had met them briefly. We had lots of conversations online. So that was quite an interesting experience coming in to a race, never having raced together before. Now, had they raced together? I don't know if any of them had. There might have been one pair that had done one race together, okay, but they weren't a common 3 to have raced together. The reason I bring that up is that's a really harder dynamic for you. If the 3 of them had raced together extensively and you show up, automatically you're the outsider to that group of 3. But the fact that there was not a ton of familiarity between them, you were all in the same boat together. Yeah, exactly. And just to jump ahead a little bit, that's an interesting contrast to Chile and Croatia, which were all very different dynamics there, where South Africa was sort of 4 individuals never racing before. Chile was 3 folks that I had raced a bunch with and my partner. And then Croatia, similarly 4 individuals who as a 4-pack hadn't raced together. A number of them had raced together independently, but all very, very experienced racers coming together. So it was interesting seeing the dynamics between the 3. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool for you to sort of live the teammates dynamics in 3 different settings and 3 different races. So sort of MP Allery, huge Dark Zone fan. I owe her a sticker. Now I really have to put it in the mail because she responded first to a question. So she's a lot of, never met her, a lot of fun online, clearly enjoys racing. How did South Africa go for the team? South Africa was a lot of fun. It was a long course. There were a lot of long legs. There was quite a range in weather. I think listeners of the Dark Zone here have heard a lot about that race. But I guess to cater that a little more specifically to our interaction there with that race, we had a couple of struggles, a couple of hurdles that were quite interesting to get past. One of them being Laval crashing on his bike. It was 2-3 a.m. Riding downhill on some rough terrain, and he grabbed a bar and was eating a bar and then slipped out and crashed. And we thought that was the end of the race. There was blood everywhere from his head, a lot of swelling, and we thought that was the end. We called for help. And because of the way that South Africa was with that number of teams, there was a backlog of teams that needed to be taken off the course of either retiring or needing help. So we were mostly on our own. We called our media person, who was MP's partner, to come meet us. And we spent about an hour sitting down and checking on Laval, making sure that it wasn't something that we needed an immediate extraction and couldn't go anywhere. I have a decent amount of experience with rescue and first aid through ski patrol and search and rescue. So we sat there and evaluated Laval for a while and realized that we could keep moving slowly. And things started to look on the up and up. And over the next couple of hours, fortunately, Zach ran into a river and couldn't drive all the way to us. We got to the next town where there was a checkpoint and went straight into the hospital, got stitched up, got a shot of Voltaren, and we're back on the race with stitches in Laval's face for the rest of the race.
As a 4? So just
as a 4-pack.
So crashed up, hospital, stitch me up, doc, right back into the race. It's like
so
hockey.
You can imagine.
It's like a hockey match.
Yeah.
It's like in between periods. You're Canadian, right? It's in your blood, right? Guy gets stitched up in the locker room, plays the next few periods.
Yeah, it's a hockey match, not a soccer match.
Exactly. No flopping. And he just stitched up, kept racing.
Absolutely. And you can imagine the highs and lows there of sitting there and all of us thinking, well, this is it. We've come to terms with it.
Right.
We're not ranked anymore. We're a 3-pack. To a couple of hours later, we're back on the course, full team, and right back at it. Some other highlights of that race, the wildlife, being able to go through different ecosystems and see all of the amazing wildlife there was really, really spectacular. We had another hurdle there with when the weather set in, when it got quite cold. We were up on top of a mountain, blowing quite hard, very cold. We backtracked down to a wedding venue where there were a number of other teams and had a reset there, which was quite fortunate that we were able to do that. But, in a race that long, of that many days, that length, there are going to be those sort of hiccups that happen, let's say, whether they're small, whether they're big. But if you can manage those and get through those and carry on, then it's just dealing with those team problems, like we say. It wasn't an individual problem. It wasn't Laval being injured. It wasn't somebody being cold up on the mountain. We, as a team, dealt with all of those and kept going for a number of days and had a great bond between all 4 of the individuals.
What was your final result?
I think we were mid-20s of 100 plus teams.
It's funny, when you follow a race like that, what happens from a dot watching perspective is you follow the top 10 teams, right? You look for that. And then every other team kind of falls into the same kind of group. So I had heard about the crash. I knew you guys were hanging in there. But there's never enough time to talk about all the teams. There's so many teams are out there and who gets knocked out and who gets put together. But I'm glad that you had a great experience there with that team that was kind of thrown together, if you will, at the last minute. And now you went down to Chile, and that was a more recent race, right? That wasn't too long ago.
Yeah, that was in, I believe, March. Headed down there with Tom and Jasper again, the 2 of the guys that I raced with in Fiji. We also raced Expedition Oregon, Expedition Canada. So we've got some experience racing together. And then my partner joined, Kia Davidson. She was our 4th person. This was her 2nd adventure race. The first one was just in May, not that many months before Expedition Canada. So her first destination expedition race, her 2nd only expedition race. So a very different dynamic of the 4 of us coming together, who Tom and Jasper, I would consider as 2 of my best friends who I've been friends with for 10 plus years. And Kia, who's been a partner of a couple of years, and her and I are building a life together. So that sort of bond of the 4 of us that comes together is different, but at the same time, it's no different. It's the same, that we run into these same sort of conditions and decisions and work through them in the same sort of way.
So I'd watch that race from a distance, and different races have different kinds of dot watching, different kinds of coverage, and one thing the Dark Zone's trying to do is that we're trying to help races standardize the experience of the person at home, right? The ability to dot watch, the ability to see the GPS signals, the on-site commentary. It's an evolving media perspective for the sport. So I'd watch that race from a distance, but I wasn't super involved. I know there was a volcano involved at one point during that race. It was so a lot of our listeners know about Worlds in South Africa, not as much about the race in Chile. Walk us through the distances, the length of the race, and how did your team do overall?
Chile was a really, really fun race and an interesting contrast to South Africa. I mean, landscapes, sure, very different. But in terms of how the race was put on, South Africa, huge production value, amazing race, lots of teams, really great experience. Contrast that to Chile, which is far fewer teams. The race director, having raced for a number of years, Nelson, putting it on with his family, where it's him, his wife, his daughter, some other family members that are all doing all different parts of the race. Very similar to what we see in South Africa with Heidi and Stefan. But contrasting that to a very, very small sort of situation where you still get that same sort of familial feel of the recognition and the camaraderie, but just in a really, really tight setting. What we saw in terms of landscapes there in Chile was really spectacular in what we got to see in such a short distance, relatively short for adventure racing, shorter than South Africa, about half the distance. I think it was around 500 kilometers. We finished in 3.5 days, but going from the lakes to the forests to the volcanoes up to, massive lava fields up on a glacier, quite spectacular, the range of different things that we got to see. And that one in Chile actually felt quite familiar to us with the mountainous feel and the forests. It felt quite familiar, but with a Chilean flair of, instead of being around cedars and Douglas fir and North American types of pine trees, being around the monkey puzzle trees and these giant old growth monkey puzzle trees that just had snow on them during the race. And that being an interesting factor, dealing with the snow there. We really, really enjoyed that race, and I highly suggest that one. We hope to go back to that one again next year.
Yeah, Nelson puts on a heck of a race, and I actually laughed about that. Nelson telling me I had heard about that his family was, every time he turned around, someone in his family was doing something else. So good on for Nelson dragging his children and his spouse into it. Talk to us about your race logistics. Where are you in terms of nutrition? Are you a real food guy? Are you a goo guy? Do you rely on local food? Do you not eat that? I know you have the celiac issue you talked about. How do you feed yourself during the race?
Feeding for me has evolved over the races. Obviously, Fiji coming into it not knowing anything, we brought down an entire suitcase of Cliff products, and that was it. And that's what we ate for the entire race, and we couldn't swallow anything by the end of the race. So something that I really like during races is diversity. That every time I pull something out of my pack, it's something new. Or, I saw it yesterday or something like that, but I'm not pulling out the same thing every time. I like diversity, something that I'm actually looking forward to eating. And I changed that up quite a bit in Chile. It really worked. And in Croatia, as I pulled something out, I was excited to see it, excited to eat it. And sure, we can talk about what we need with sugars and carbs and fats and proteins, et cetera. And I think somebody else would be better spoken about that. Somebody like Nick, who was on recently, who I've raced with, Nick Herf there. Yeah. But I like to have diversity. And because of my celiac issue, I try to bring down as much food as I can. Whenever I fly somewhere, I bring basically a 70-liter duffel bag filled with food, filled with all the snacks, mix it with bars, treats. I like liquid nutrition as well, liquid carbs, high density liquid carbs, something like Flow or 4 Hour Fuel. And then as often as I can, supplementing that with good real food. And whether that's at a TA and being able to buy something, or along the course being able to pop in somewhere, even to grab a bag of chips or something like that. In addition, dehydrated meals, I always have a handful in each of the bins so that I can make one, trying at least once a day to have a dehydrated meal, not only to have just sort of the feeling of eating something real, but also getting some of those nutrients that your body's craving, the vitamins and minerals that you're not necessarily getting from some of the bars that you're eating otherwise. Good job. Shout out Nick Herf. Nick's episode, several episodes back. If you're listening, folks, go back in the list a little bit.
Nick, during his episode, completely on his own, basically gave a masterclass on nutrition and how bodies work. And I think the biggest takeaway that comes from that is that he made the point, and I'll repeat it here, is that everybody's nutritional needs are unique. That there's a general spectrum that we all work inside of, but you have to feel comfortable. Like, for example, I know for myself that when I pass day 3 and 4 of a race, it's all about simple sugars for me. It's like, I like the dehydrated meal. Don't get me wrong. I'm in the TA and I get a warm meal of me. That's great. But I lose the ability to, like, I don't want to eat burgers. I don't want a sandwich. Like, that just goes away from day 3 on. I have to, leading up to day 3, I need regular food along the way. I try to pack that, but it's interesting how your body reacts. But to your point, you only know that when you've raced with different things, right? You've tried different experiences. You've done sort of that, like, I know for myself too, Uncrustable peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, like, just keep feeding me those. Like, if you're listening to Uncrustables, count me as a sponsor, send in the food. I'll talk about you all you want. Like, those things really go, they're sweet and things like that. That's what we do there. But for the new listener, the new racer, you have to try different things, right? And I have to laugh, by the way, about the Cliff Bar thing, because so many racers do. They just do a pure, one of my best partners, one of my best friends is an engineer, and he is just so calories this, put calories in you. But eventually I'm like, oh God, like, I can't eat another bar, another gel, another goo. So you're right about that. That's one thing that comes on there. How do you do with sleep? How's that impact you during a race?
Sleep's an ongoing, interesting strategy to navigate, and similar to the nutrition that we're talking about there, where you have to try it during a race. It's the same thing with sleep. That's something that comes over time of figuring that out during a race, both how your body reacts to it, what the signs and symptoms are of your sleep deprivation, how well you're able to manage that, if you're able to push through it, and then devising strategies to deal with that, whether that's by trial and error, which we've done a decent amount of, or mentorship and talking to other experienced racers and working through that. But even talking to racers who have done it at a very elite level professionally for many, many years, nobody has the exact right answer because there's so many variables involved. Are we going into a technical section? Is there a good spot to sleep here? Is it going into a rainy section where we're not going to be able to sleep? Are we going to try and push through this section and take some caffeine pills, or do we want to preload some of that sleep? I think for us, we are on the aspect of pushing that limit and really, really trying to push that sleep deprivation without compromising either our safety or our mental aptitude or our physical speed. That if we see any of those start to falter, then it's time to reevaluate. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm hurting, let's have a nap. But if somebody's starting to swerve on the bike, then maybe we need to abandon everything that we had planned for our sleep strategy, lie in the ditch for 10 minutes and have a reset, because we don't need somebody falling asleep at the wheel. Yeah,
we had that nose arc recently. We had a great race down the nose arc, a lot of fun. It was my Jim, Pete, and Sherry, and we were on this one climb leading into one of the final transition areas, and we were just a mess. All 4 of us were falling asleep, and we just pulled to the side of the road. It was the highest part of a hill. We laid down in the grass for about 15 minutes. Amazing how that will just get you over the hump to get you down into the TA to go. The body's a fascinating thing how that happens. It's absolutely fascinating. I also think too, I think one mistake that racers make is they start counting their awake time from the wrong number. Like, I always argue, like, it's not when you wake up the morning of the race that you really count your sleep time. You have to go back a day and see where you were and what was the sleep leading into the race. Because if you have travel and crummy sleep, you're starting with a deficit. You could still get 6 hours night for a race. And what's a night for a race? It's all restless sleeping. It's not sleeping. Like, your falling asleep time is back further because you have to start the clock early on how long you've been awake. It's a common mistake that I make and a lot of other people make.
And not only just the sleep that you get the night before, but look at that day before as well. What was your on foot time versus your rest time? Were you spending the entire day running around trying to chase a missing bike axle and sourcing food, etc.? Or were you all ready for the race, and the day before you were able to lie on the beach and relax and hang out and recharge your body? Yeah,
and the adrenaline will only carry you so far, right? That pre-race adrenaline, getting excited and the briefing and turning in your gear, eventually that all flows out of you. How did you guys do in Chile? What was your overall result?
In Chile, we ended up second. We were, quite proud of that. We pushed quite hard. We had a fun race, so a good battle with Uruguay for between second and third there. We saw them quite a lot. And then another couple of teams that we saw a few times chasing at our heels as well. And, seeing Vitorade, they're a very fast team. They weren't really catchable by us in that race, but sort of seeing them on the horizon and seeing some things that we can try and work towards over the next while. Adventure racing, building a career out of this it's a long game. It's a many year game, and thinking about the things that we can start to build and work towards, and the experience that we can gain, because we talk about sleep and nutrition and training, etc., but experience is a huge part of this. And racing.
So Ben, if I may ask, is that part of your plan? Is part of your plan to race on a professional level? Is that where you are?
I would like to push it as hard as I can. Through adventure racing, I found that I really enjoy pushing my limits. I found that in other walks of life as well, in other stages of my life. But through adventure racing, every time I find my limit, I push past it. And now I'm finding that limit is trying to push as hard as possible in the race, and trying to cultivate that with folks around me. Folks like Jen Seeger, James Gallipo, who have been around the scene for a long time and really want to push it. Folks like Tom and Jasper and Kia, who are really, really strong athletes who I want to build together with. And then the others on our team, like MP, who is building another race organization, Sea to Sky Racing in BC as well, along with her partner, Zach, who are extremely, extremely motivated in this sport, and sort of building this sort of group around all of us together in Canada to try and push as hard as we can, both in terms of the number of races, but then choosing when and where to push it as hard as we can and try and chase the podium.
Did a lot of bike racing back in about 10, 15 years ago. And when we'd race in Vermont, and when the Canadian team would show up, we knew we were in trouble. Right? Canadians are just a tough, strong. They train in hard conditions. They race in hard conditions, and they're strong and they're powerful on the bike. And it sounds like you're working hard to sort of build that around yourself as you do that.
Yeah, exactly. And something that I find with Canadians, I might be biased because I'm speaking as one, but the sort of friendly camaraderie that comes with that, where, in Fiji, we were known as the smiley, happy Canadian team. Whenever anybody saw us, we were happy and joyful. And of course, we didn't get any airtime because we were too boring. We didn't have a story or a blow up or anything like that. We were just smiling the whole time.
Let me ask you that question. So did you know, I've heard people who've raced in Fiji that they knew, they didn't see a single camera. They didn't see a single, maybe they were the background of one scene. Did you know going into it, listen, there's not a single stitch of us on this TV show?
I did not expect any of that to happen. And I think we got 2, maybe 3-second blurbs, just our faces in the background from some montage sequence. And that was it.
Clearly, you found your tribe. You had South Africa, you had Chile, AR Croatia. Who'd you race with? How'd that race go?
So Croatia came into that one with Jen Seeger and James Gallipo, who I just mentioned there, and then Dave Ellis as well, who I raced with in South Africa. And those 3 have all been racing for 20-ish years, a whole lot of experience. And I, obviously feel like a rookie compared to those folks. And I learned a lot coming into it and racing with them. Those 3 had raced before at Expedition Canada, and then in other combinations, and having raced for that many years, there's that interconnectedness that develops that we've talked about there. But my first time racing with those 3, and the first time the 4 of us racing as a 4-pack. And it was interesting coming into that, where some of the races that I've gone into, we have many, many conversations ahead of time, lots of Zoom calls, chatting about strategies, gear, etc. With this 4, we had a 30-minute call, and that was it. We had a spreadsheet of gear, but everybody knew what they were doing. Everybody knew what they were bringing. Everybody knew what their role was. And we all showed up in Frankfurt. Fortunately, our connecting flights all arrived in Frankfurt, and then we flew to Croatia from there. And then everything just started gelling. We started functioning on all cylinders, and as little bits of problems showed up as we were preparing for the race, it was really easy to navigate, good communication with everybody. Everyone was on the same page, and we hit the start line as a fully functioning, coherent team. Unfortunately, not with much sleep. Looking at the night before, we flew in 2 days before the race in the evening. So we had 1 day to pack, 1 night of 3 hours of sleep, and then straight into the race. So it was hit the ground running for that one.
How'd you do there?
Yeah. That one, we ended up, I think, 6th place in that one. That one, we had a bit of a mishap. Interesting seeing how, looking at risk management is something that we talk about as the Swiss cheese model, where if one hole of the Swiss cheese lines up, nothing is really going to be an issue because you can manage that. You've got all these layers behind it to capture what can happen there. But we had a number of bad events line up to result in us losing a map and us being stuck on the course with no map and no way forward. It was a combination of three of us all making very minor decisions that would have been reconcilable on their own, but the three of them all piling up meant that we had no map. So we had to sit on course.
So that's really interesting. We'll go back to that story in a second, but the cascading effect of bad things happening, right? Like one thing by itself we could deal with, two things, but all of a sudden as it cascades down, the end result is a massive challenge, right? A massive problem to solve, which is the idea that you're now on the course and you don't have a map on you. I was in a race one time where I saw a well-meaning teammate thought they were extra maps and put them inside a bike box. And they almost left and they had like traced the truck down to get the maps out of the bike box.
Wow.
So how did you solve that unique problem?
We talked a little bit about what we could do. And unfortunately, we realized quite quickly that we couldn't really go anywhere. We had one more map. We had, maybe 10 kilometers of biking or so with 2 more checkpoints. And we realized that we should probably just stay where we are right now. It was 2:30 in the morning. We knew that there was a team behind us somewhere. And we were in a bit of a shelter, and it was a decent spot to wait. And we knew that once we waited and that team caught up to us, we would be well rested and then able to push forward and carry on from there. So we waited for another team to show up, we had been competing with through the race. And I think their eyes were wide when we looked so excited to see them. They were also, I think, a little taken aback why we were lounging in this shelter with our things everywhere, looking like we had been there for a number of hours. But asked them for one of their extra maps, and unfortunately they had lost the same map. So they only had
the map was slippery. It's not your guys' fault.
No. So they only had one copy of this map, but with our mandatory gear of the digital camera, took a photo of it, just a little GoPro screen, and then navigated on a screen, a very small screen for that point down to the next TA for the next handful of kilometers. So it was a setback. We lost 8 hours or so waiting at that TA for that team to come. But a couple things out of that. One is the sort of camaraderie that we talk about that transcends through the race as well. That you don't really want to beat a team because they lost a map. You want to beat a team because you made certain decisions or navigation decisions or sleep strategies, or you pushed harder, etc. But you don't always want to beat them because of that, especially when you're racing for 6th place. That if we were the opposite way around, if we came across a 5th place team when we were there, absolutely we would help them and give them a map the best that we could. And that team was overjoyed to help us and asked for us to join them and navigate together and work together if that was the best option for us.
It's a funny dynamic, right? The idea, like, what do you do with, like, adventure racing is such a sport where we're very tightly connected to each other in various ways. If you were fighting for a podium spot and the team in front of you had a broken bike, we'd be like, can we help you? Like, we wouldn't like tough luck suckers. Like, we would give tools or something. We probably wouldn't fix the bike for them personally, but we'd stop and check on them. Like, what do you need? What can we do for you? And that's the nature. It's a very interesting dynamic in the sport there.
It is. And that takes the next level of if somebody's truly injured or really needs help.
Oh, yeah.
Every team would abandon their race essentially to help somebody in need.
In a heartbeat.
In a heartbeat.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, and I've had the chance to race across multiple sports, multiple disciplines, and I've stuck with adventure racing for the longest time because I think it's that dynamic that kind of runs through it. The idea that, like, we're at the end of the day, we take care of each other along the way. We're hard competitors, right? And I want to beat you and I want to put you into the ground because that's fair racing. That's separate from the fact that the person is injured, needs help, or you want to win fairly. Right. We know the feeling of winning. It's like ashes in your mouth when you win on an asterisk. It's no fun that way.
Sure. And AR, it's racing, as we know from the title, and then also an adventure, that everybody is in this as an adventure together and go explore and see amazing places and have these amazing interactions. And the other thing that we took out of losing the map there is, we had been chasing towards the podium. I don't know if we would have ended up there, but we were chasing that. We were, trying to push as hard as we could and pushing quite hard. And now we've sat for 8 hours, and we know that we are clearly out of contention for one of those top spots. And we didn't let that affect us. We didn't take a back seat. We didn't slow down. We kept pushing as hard as we could. I'm sure subconsciously we probably could have pushed harder if we were, if we could see second place in front of us or third place in front of us. But we kept pushing really hard, and we didn't gain any spots, but we kept going and pushing hard.
You also didn't cannibalize each other, right? You didn't eat each other alive. So that could happen in some teams. Some teams could have been in the blame game. You had it less. You had it less. It's just, it is what it is, right? It's a team problem. It's not your problem to solve.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially when it's a Swiss cheese and a whole bunch of things line up with multiple decisions.
Yeah. I always think that's just that's adventure racing is a huge laboratory for stuff like that to see those human dynamics. Now, Croatia, talk about that race a little bit. First things first, like the transitions, the racing, the terrain. Like, how did you find that race to go?
It was fast. Doing, I think, 6 legs in the first day. Very quick legs, especially on the first trek there. That was quite hot. A lot of overheating on some of the teams, and quick transitions. It really comes in with some of that experience and expertise of being able to move quickly through a transition, and then being able to keep that speed elevated and keep engaged and keep pushing as quick as you can. And then trying to maintain that through some of the longer legs. Through one of the treks ended up being a 17-hour trek for us. I think the fastest teams did it in 15 hours, but trying to maintain that speed through that. And it's interesting how different that feels. If you look at a 3.5, 4-day race, if it has 8 legs versus 16 legs, you can push just as hard, but it feels different when you're transitioning so quickly in so many different sports and having fresh legs, fresh arms for paddling, and trying to push as quick as you can.
Also, it's interesting too, like the idea of the transitions, because Igor loves all those transitions. If it's a 12-hour race and you waste 5 minutes each hour, you've now given back an hour of the race time, right? So you got to get through those parts really quickly. You mentioned the trek, the 17-hour trek. How did you take care of your feet? What's your strategy there?
That one was okay for us. We didn't have much in the way of foot problems. Other races, when it gets quite wet, you really want to be on top of that of every, 5-6 hours or so. Check on your feet, make sure that there's no hot spots, treat them with something hydrophobic. We were using Skin Doctor, but in this case, it was relatively dry. There was a bit of moisture, but our feet ended up relatively okay. It was difficult though, because of how fast things were and how much rock there was, that just time on feet on rock moving quickly, got a little sore on the feet. But I think that the expertise of those three, of knowing if there's something wrong, deal with it. Don't let it fester and deal with it later when it's an actual problem, of being preemptive. That we were on top of that and checked in regularly to see how we were doing on all of those aspects, and we were able to keep pushing through, no problem.
I know that Bend Racing talks about having a protocol in place where every 5 hours they stop and check their feet no matter what. They could feel great, not feel great, they'd go. And I've always said to myself, like, I should really do that, but I've never had the chance to actually do that. But I think that's a really a solid thing to do. And also taking care of your feet along the way is just clutch. Not letting those things fester. I've seen some gnarly feet, mine included, and people like get good socks, get some lube, and like just take care of your feet.
Absolutely. And that sort of pre-thought of, I need to do something about my feet, or thinking about things that you need to do. That's a realization that I had in one of these recent races, was when those thoughts come into your mind, especially later in the race, and they can be a little bit cyclical, like, I need to eat, I need to drink, I need to do something to take care of myself. And if you're in that sleep deprived state, you can kind of push that away and just keep going. But recognizing those thoughts and being self-aware of those and acknowledging them and doing something about it, either now because it's something that needs to be done, or, I'm stuck in these sauna pants and I'm sweating too much. Does that mean I need to stop right now? Or does that mean we can stop at the next checkpoint when the team's going to stop anyway? So having those conversations, being aware of those thoughts, and then having conversations and dealing with them at an appropriate time.
I agree. I think you're right. And the idea of communicating during the course of the race, right? And keep an eye. Obviously, who does the navigation for the team? Are you the nav, or someone else take care of it? Or do you back somebody up?
I'm the primary nav, and we have some really good secondary nav as well.
What's your biggest challenge with the navigation? Where do you struggle?
The biggest part that I struggle with the navigation is when there's a major decision point of after I've made that decision, I try to make the decision quickly. I try and think about that decision ahead of time so that I can mull things over and analyze all different aspects of it. Because with any navigation decision, there are so many different variables in there and so many things to factor in. Of when I've made that decision and I've confidently made it and moved forward with it, then having more information come in that then leads me to believe that the other decision would have been better. Not to the degree of we need to turn around because we're going the wrong direction, but shoot, if we had gone the other way, we would have saved half an hour or an hour. And I can get down on myself about that. That happened in both Chile and in Croatia, of making a decision that if we had made something slightly different would have saved a decent amount of time. And I think that centers around the team of feeling bad that I'm putting the team through an extra half an hour or an hour of this when I could have made a decision that would have been easier for them.
I always have sympathy for navigators. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, full disclosure, I carry heavy stuff and I keep up, right? And that's my role, and I'm fine with that. And like the macro stuff I'm good with. I know where we are in terms of the whole race, but that micro navigation, having a map in your hand, I do not do. And I have to tell you, I am so impressed with the navigators I've seen in big races. The mental pressure of having first off, you're doing everything else physically. You're doing all the other same physical stuff that everybody else is doing, right? So you don't have an easier path to follow. But on top of that, your job is to have that map in your hands and expend the mental energy of knowing where you are in time and space during the race. Has to be so exhausting for the navigator.
Yeah, the navigating is something that I really, really enjoy. I really enjoy that challenge and that struggle and balancing all of those things, balancing the mental engagement that for the entire race, you need to be fully mentally engaged. That if you turn your brain off for a moment, then that could be catastrophic. And of course, there are times that you're on a 20-kilometer grind on a bike on a straight road and you can shut off for a moment. But the amount of mental engagement that's needed for the entirety of the race, I really enjoy that challenge.
God bless you. That's a better man than me. That's all I have to say. We have the 2024 World Championship is in Ecuador. Santiago Lopez is putting that on. Going to be a great race. Santiago has a great reputation. Right behind it, 2025 Worlds is going to come to Canada. Expedition Canada is going to be involved in that. Now, I know that's a whole other division of the team, right? You're not involved in that. And we have, like I said, we have the podcast with Lindy and John coming up to talk about what that race is going to be like. But talk to me a bit about your thoughts about Canada hosting Worlds. What role do you expect to play in that? Will you be racing in it, not racing in it? I think I know the answer to that question. Like, what are your thoughts? We're a year and a half away from it, but it's never too early to talk about a big race like that. What do you think about hosting the race?
I think it's really, really exciting that that's coming. And with the Expedition Canada race that started just a few years ago, I've got a really good bond with the race directors there, a really good relationship there. And once Worlds was announced, then we came together and decided to make this sort of relationship together that we would be the racing team associated with the race that's going to happen with Worlds and be able to go to as many races as possible and spread the word about it and use that as sort of a foundation to build this team around us. I'm really excited for it to come. I know that it's going to be fantastic here. It doesn't matter where you go in Canada. Within 700 kilometers, as the race is going to be, you can hit so many different landscapes, so many different ecosystems. It's going to be wild. It's going to be out there. It's going to be remote. I look forward to hosting all these teams on our stage, and I will absolutely be racing. On one hand, one of the things that I love more than anything about adventure racing is the landscapes we get to see. I've built careers around working in the outdoors as a forester and an avalanche forecaster and involved with search and rescue. So I spend a lot of my time outside. And of course, there's all the amazing things that we talk about in adventure racing, the team dynamics and pushing your limits and the physicality, et cetera. But the landscapes that we get to see, I think, are amazing, being able to travel around the world and see so many different things. So I think it will be an amazing opportunity for folks from elsewhere in the world to be able to come to Canada and see some of the beautiful landscapes that we have. It will be very diverse, from desert-like terrain to mountainous terrain, lush forests, and everything in between.
I think that's you're spot on in that analysis. That you do some races around the world, you kind of know what you're going to get. Like AR Croatia, beautiful race. It's going to sell out, going to do great every single year. Beautiful area. You have a sense of the playground that they have to work with there. Same thing goes in other parts of the world, right? We see in Croatia, we see it in, if we go with, like, for example, Expedition Oregon. Once again, an amazing race, going to do really, really well. You have a sense of where you're going to be, right? Not that there's no surprises left, but you have a sense of it. But the location for Expedition Canada and the circumference of the area and all the choices that the race directors are going to have for the racers is going to make for an experience where it will be really, really, really hard for even the best of teams to have a strong sense of the course going into the race. And as a result, then you get the maps, and it's every person for themselves, right? Because it's a fair fight in that way. By the way, I kind of guess the answer to the question. There's no way that you are not going to be on the start line of Expedition Canada, representing Expedition Canada and Canada in the race, and you're going to be fantastic hosts. Before we take off here, Ben, you've been very generous with your time. What are other thoughts you want to leave us with? A lot of listeners to the Dark Zone are newer racers. There are folks that they hear big 5-6 day races and they get concerned, they get thrown off a little bit. Make the water warm and inviting. What do you want to tell them so they get into adventure racing?
Sure. For those wanting to get into adventure racing or just dabbling in the shorter races and looking at the longer races, it seems intimidating, but it's not as bad as it seems. Of course, it's going to hurt. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be painful, and you're going to be pushing yourselves, but you can do it if you put in the time. And that involves getting outside, doing the training. You don't need to necessarily have a training plan like we've talked about and have a coach, etc., but get out there and do it. Make yourself uncomfortable. Get off the trail. Don't just follow the trail that you've done every day thinking that I just need to put in the kilometers. Go wander off the trail, go explore, go get lost, go wander around, make yourself uncomfortable. And one thing that I really enjoy with a lot of these races is they're making them very achievable by many folks. That, of course, those at the top are going to be chasing all of the pro points, all the mandatory points, and there are no optional checkpoints for those teams. But a lot of these races are built in a way that there are a number of optional checkpoints where if you don't feel that you can do a 60 kilometer trek, most of them are designed in the way that you could cut that into a 20, 30 kilometer trek, do a little bit more biking, something like that. So they are all achievable, and take it step by step. If you have races close by that are in the 30-hour realm, get onto one of those. If there's an expedition race, sign up, get into it, and try your best. Get as far as you can, get as hard as you can, and the next time you'll get further. So although it seems like a big hurdle, it's very achievable by many folks.
Well, there you have it, folks. Another episode of the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. Thanks for being here, and thanks for joining the show. Ben loves adventure racing, loves talking about it, loves chatting about it, loves doing everything about it, and he was a great guest. I'm excited for him and his team as Expedition Canada gets closer and closer. He's so proud of the sport, so proud of his country, and they will be great hosts. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being a listener. If you like what you hear, please head over to your platform of choice and like and click and subscribe and do all those things. The algorithm likes it when that happens. So thanks again for being here. Thanks for being a listener. And remember, folks, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.